Hello and welcome to Rise Up with Orion. My name is Jenny Gray. I'm the clinical training manager here at Orion, and we've got Darren Elkins with us today. Just as a reminder, everybody in attendance will receive their points for attending, their health promotion points. And this is also you're going to be able to review this in the future if you want to revisit and listen to this again and again and keep learning. And I am new to this, I apologize, and I am trying to find the record button. So bear with me one quick moment.
It actually is being recorded.
Oh, is it being? Okay, well, there we go.
Did that. You got it. It says on my screen, this session is being recorded. I think you
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Darren. That was my number one fear of doing this and then not having this available for everybody else to see. So thank you. So everyone, just introducing Darren really quick. He is the Clinical Operations Director at Blomquist Hale Solutions. He has received his master's degree in Family and Therapy and Marriage, Family and Therapy from Utah State University. He also holds 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Utah in Psychology and Family and Human Development. He has served on various boards, including the Utah chapter of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Darren has a wide range of experience and training, including couples and family issue, solution-focused therapy, drug and alcohol assessment, neurofeedback, managing stress and anxiety, and he has worked closely with organizations to support their unique challenges, including crisis response, employee issues, and leadership training. So we are so thrilled to have you. I cannot imagine someone with more experience and insight to talk about what we are going to talk about today.
Well, thank you so much. You built that up way too much, though. I can imagine a lot of people who could probably, but thank you so much. And I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to talk about this topic with you and everybody.
Absolutely. Well, we're so happy. And this is a topic that is on everyone's mind as we are approaching the end of the year, the holiday seasons. Communication, relationships, boundaries are all really prevalent and on people's minds. Yeah. So just to get things going, from your experience, where does communication rank in its importance in building meaningful relationships?
That's a good question. Well, I think communication is, for a long time, has been kind of the big buzzword, right? When you think of relationships, I think we all think of our challenges with communication. Like everyone says, it's always about communication. And to be frank, I think we'd have to be honest and say sometimes we probably overrank it. That's not a good way to start a seminar topic, is it? Say, oh, this topic is overrated. I certainly don't want to say that.
That was a redundant question, and just thinking, oh, of course, it's communication. It's number one.
It's the biggest one there is, yeah. But I would say there are other factors that are really critical. But in the end, don't we determine a lot of our happiness and success by the communication? So whether or not it's the reason for our challenges is certainly the thing that we look at to tell us how good are we doing. People are different. Sometimes you ask people, and I don't want to overgeneralize this, but sometimes I find out this from men when I say, what's the strength of your relationship? And they'll say, well, we haven't fought in a while, so it's good. Whereas sometimes females, and again, this doesn't always break along those lines, but we'll say it's not good. Even though we haven't fought, we haven't communicated, we haven't talked through things. So everyone's built a little bit different in how they look at this. But certainly at the end of the day, communication is how we get things done, right? It's how we connect. And if the communication is poor, whether it's just daily communication, just kind of routine, how we do things, or if it's more like conflict management, either way, it really does. It really does make it decides for us, are we happy or are we not in a relationship? It's really important.
It sounds like it's really one of those foundational elements that if you don't have strong communication, everything that needs to be built on top of it is on shaky ground.
Absolutely. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So with communication being so important, and you were talking about various places and aspects where communication plays an important role, why does it go wrong so often? What are the pitfalls of communication that people often fall into?
That's a good question. Let's back up a step, because we often miss that what happens before the communication sets the tone. In one massive study that done by the Gottman Institute, and they're really good at studying communication. They have a lot of research they've done to help us understand it. One of the things they found was that one of the greatest predictors of a positive outcome between two people, and you can see this, a lot of their work's on married couples, but this I think really applies to all communication relationships, is that all these other factors of their skill level, their education, you look at so many different things, they found that the single greatest predictor of a positive outcome with a communication is the attribution of goodwill going into the conversation. That sounds like maybe kind of a no-brainer, but really, actually, that's really critical when you think about when communication has been soured, when you're not getting along with somebody, what is the first thing we do? We cut out the stuff we don't need to do. If I had a strained relationship with somebody, we start to cut out the communication and the interactions that are the easier ones, because I just don't want to be around you, right? So the good kind of things, the going out to dinner and spending time, if it's work related, the water cooler moments, those things kind of go by the wayside. And we say, I'm only going to talk to you when I have to. Well, you know, when I have to usually means problems, things that need to get addressed.
Right.
So think about it. And how could any relationship do well if the only time you talk is when you're having problems? So I would say one of the first things we want to look at when we look at our communication and the predictors of positive success is that we don't forget to do the easy stuff, the things that create connection and meaning between you, that remind you that this is another person that you like, that you have things in common with, that they can be easy. There can be easy things. Don't give up on those things. Don't let those go away when the rest of the communication is challenged.
I love that. So really focusing on the smaller things. And you mentioned going into communication with this attitude of goodwill. When you said that, for me, I interpreted that as going in with mutual respect for another person. Is there more to that goodwill
No,
that
no,
you're thinking of?
No, I think that's where it comes from, right? But if it's genuine, it has to come from more than just I think it can be a decision to show respect. Like that's part of it, is just to say, I in general have respect for other people and treat them kindly. That's part of it. But to have genuine, actual positive filters for someone, I think we're talking about having the kind of experiences that give you the benefit of the doubt for that person. That when you do have mistakes and slip ups and things don't go perfectly, we tend to say in our mind, well, you're not a bad person. You're not perfect, but that's okay. And I'm going to kind of give you the benefit of the doubt and put a positive spin on what you're saying instead of negatively interpreting everything. But I think what you're referring to is really important, regardless of whether that's there or not, whether you've had those good experiences. I think we can choose to just be respectful, right? If we're our best self, like we can go into a conversation saying, regardless of whether I think you've earned it or not, I think I can treat you with respect because it's important to me.
Well, and it sounds like maybe respect is the minimum, and for even higher level or more positive communication, adding that element of goodwill. And as you were describing that, of remembering the good things, of believing the best in people, what occurred to me is that often it is the people that we have the most important relationships with that it's the hardest to go into those dialogues and enter that communication effectively and with that goodwill that you're speaking about. Why is that? Why is it so hard with the people that it should be the easiest, theoretically, to have that goodwill?
Yeah, that's a great question because it seems backwards, doesn't it? It seems like those should be the ones that we do our best in. The most important things are the things you should do your best in, because the importance of my relationship with the person at the restaurant or whatever isn't high. It's not It's not something that's at the end of the day matters a whole lot. If we have a little bit of a tough interaction, well, we'll be going our way. But here, the human nature is that a crucial conversation has 3 components. Okay, we learned this from the book Crucial Conversations, but I think they have 3 components. One is the stakes are high, right? That makes a crucial conversation. The opinions may vary, and then the third, and what you're referring to, is the emotions can be strong. The more you care about somebody, the more you care about a situation, a relationship, the more emotion you have in it. And that's a good thing sometimes, right? We have better, the good news is when it goes well, the payoff is greater, right? In your close relationships, I mean, in your non-close relationships, if I have a great interaction, even if it went really well, the payoff is low because I don't have a connection to that person. But if I can have a strong relationship with somebody and I'm vulnerable, I put myself out there, I let you see something I'm thinking and feeling, you in turn empathize or feel it and kind of sit with me in it, and I feel that you really respected it, then the payoff is wonderful. Like I feel like we really connect. And that's the positive side of that. But if it doesn't go well, we're more vulnerable and the pain could be greater, right? The discomfort is higher because there's more at stake. So that's the tricky thing with emotion, though. Our ability to manage goes down, right? We all know this, that your emotions turn off sometimes when they're really high. They turn off some of your best thinking, right? When you're flooded. I use that term, flooded. When I'm flooded, I tend to go to my animal brain and I have less of my cognitive abilities. So I get flooded, and next thing you know, I'm not at my best. I'm not using my best skills because I'm overwhelmed with emotion.
I think that's so interesting, and that makes so much sense of when you're going into those really high stakes conversations. I'm curious, when you're entering this conversation and you've maybe got these pieces, you've got your goodwill, you've got your mutual respect, you're entering this crucial conversation. When you're armed, I guess, with all of these effective communication tools, and you enter a dialogue where you are not met with goodwill or respect. Can you describe that? Because that's very difficult, and that makes people, even if you're armed with all of these strong communication tools, it can make you defensive and make you retreat. So how do you approach that when maybe you're working on your own communication, but the person that you're trying to enter a dialogue is not and comes off a little attacking or not respectful?
That's a great question, because we're not talking about, we'd like to believe that if I just do all the right things, I get to predict and create an outcome. There's things in life that you can do that with, for the most part, right? You might have a hobby where, for the most part, if you follow the rules, if you love to cook, and if you follow the rules, you can always predict a positive outcome. Something might happen out of your control, the oven might break, but most of the time you can predict the outcome. Humans just don't work that way, do they? You could give your very best. You could come in with a very non-threatening, very vulnerable and caring approach and still get somebody's defenses. Now, the likelihood is lower. That's the good news, right? If you come at it from a vulnerable place. Think about a scenario. For example, you're walking down the street and you see somebody, what looks like a parent, hovering under a tree, and their child is up in the tree and they're playing in the tree. And you're reacting because you're thinking, this child is above concrete and it looks dangerous, right? The branch isn't very stable and they're kind of swaying. And you're watching this parent talking to somebody, not paying attention. Now, I could get pretty upset about that, right? It might get be worried. My primary emotion is concern, right? My primary emotion is worry and concern and fear for this child. That's fear. But if I let that fear instead turn into anger, and I promise I'm going to come back to your question. I feel like I'm taking a detour here.
Great.
But I let that fear turn into anger, then I respond out of that anger. Like, what kind of parent are you? What are you doing? Like, get your child a tree. What am I going to get back? How are they going to respond?
They're going to match your energy, right? They're going to be equal. They're going to be defensive. They're going to be angry back.
Yep. Most likely, they're going to give me their secondary emotion. They're going to skip right to their anger. And that's how we interact with another. Now, to come back to your question, if I come at it with my primary emotion, which is concern and fear, like, oh, I'm really worried. This branch looks really unsafe. Can I help you? It looks like we might need to address their safety. Now, they have a choice to make, right? I've given them more of a primary emotional thing. I haven't come at them with my anger. I think I'm more likely to get them to be, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, I'm sorry, and I wasn't paying attention. I'm more likely to get their primary emotion, but that's not guaranteed. They might interpret me, even though I gave them a primary emotional response, as being attacking, that I'm really judging them and that they're a bad parent. And so they may just come at it with their defensiveness. Just come back to what you said. There's no guarantee. So then what we do is we make sure that first I've self-soothed. I am in a place where I'm managing my own emotion. We call it soothing, right? We call that soothing when you're a baby, and it's an adult skill too. The ability to soothe and manage your emotional state. What are the things you do to soothe? Breathe, the way you talk to yourself, the way you kind of manage your emotional distress. That's a key skill that we sometimes don't pay attention to in life, is just the ability to self-soothe. And then secondly, to self-confront, right? To say, I'm looking at my own stuff and seeing how I'm reacting. And if I've done both of those really effectively and you're in a defensive place, then I'm in a place to kind of just let you own that and kind of share my boundaries. That's where boundaries start to kick in, right? I start to say, all right, so I can see maybe you're not in a place that I want us to be in. Tell me why you're feeling defensive. You know, I'm getting defensiveness from you. Tell me how I'm coming? Maybe I didn't come across the way I intended. You know, you could try to clarify that. In relationships that are really in trouble, you can use tools like the speaker listener technique. Like, you have a troubled history, it's really been hard. You can use things like, you grab a pen and I speak, you restate what I said, and then I give you the pen, you speak, and then I restate. Those skills help us to learn to undo the ways that we always think. You know, like, I say something, you repeat it back to me, and I hear you say, I'm like, that's not exactly what I was trying to say. Let me say it again until we get it right. Sometimes we need those. When things aren't going well, we get official, right? Like in life, if I'm struggling with a skill, I might need to get some specific training about that skill. I can't just rely on my training. So we might have to get into some skills based, like, what does it mean to listen? How do you actually listen? How do you make sure you're speaking in a way that's respectful? Dive into those skills. But at some point, you may just have to create a boundary and say, you know, this isn't a good time to talk. We don't feel like we're in a place that we're managing this very well. We might need to take a break and come back and talk about it later.
I love that. So really, it sounds like filling your own toolbox to increase your own ability to communicate as much as possible, and recognizing that you can control your response and nobody else's. So when you come with this goodwill, with this respect, with all of these positive communication tools, and you're met with defensiveness or anger or resentment, whatever negative emotion, it sounds like that's a great place where you can acknowledge that you've done what you can. You put that boundary and say, we can come back to this when it's a time that's going to be more productive, and that's not going to be right now. And that's valid, and that's a great place to be.
Yeah, I think so. I think in every relationship, every person needs the key skill of knowing when to call a time and when to call a timeout. I mean, I do this for a living, but there are just times I'm not in a good place to talk. Maybe I recognize that before we even get into the conversation, and I address that. And so I might have to learn the skill of saying, I need to get back to a place where I can be my better self. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to go take some breaths and manage myself, and then I can come back to this conversation. That skill alone can really be the difference, because when you think about it, the damage is hard to overcome. Can I give you an example? Like,
please.
let's say that when we walk into the room together, okay, and you and I are in a meeting, and I come in and I say, you know, I got to tell you, you have such a bright, cheery attitude. I love the way you just have such a positive outlook. I love the way you got the most creative ideas. You're really funny. You smell awful, and you and you're really fast on coming up with ideas. You know, I came up with 5 things. Okay, I'm sure you smell fine, by the way. It's a safe example because we're in Zoom,
Right.
so
We're virtual, so it's okay. It felt really safe.
right? But what are you thinking about the rest of the day? I said 4 nice things, really nice things, and then one
Mhm.
thing that. But what are you thinking about the rest of the day?
That would consume me. I
Yeah,
would only be thinking about that negative thing.
yeah. So we have the map that works against us. That's why it's important that we live by the physician's creed, which is above all, do no harm. Because it's easier to do damage than good in relationships. That's unfortunate. It's easier to knock houses down, takes a lot less time than to build them up, right? And that's true of relationships. It's easier to do damage than good. So above all, we want to avoid the harm, right? If there's significant harm, that was a very unkind thing I said, but there are
Hmm.
things that are much worse than that. And if you do
Absolutely.
real harm, then it takes a lot to overcome that. So above all else, that ability to know when I'm about to do harm and I need to step away from that is a life skill that is critical. And if anybody listening is struggling with that one, that's where you start, because who wants to spend their whole life recovering from those mistakes, right? All the work it takes to overcome one thing that was done that was so damaging. So that ability to know when I am not going to be in a good place and I'm going to do harm is a key skill. Learning yourself and finding out from other people. Maybe they know you better than you, but whatever ways you do it, find out where your limits are, and how you know that before the damage. If the way you know is you've already started to do those things, that's not early enough. Find out what that looks like before it happens.
Absolutely. So, and I feel like maybe I jumped too far in ahead because we hear this term about boundaries a lot. I feel like it's all over social media. You find articles about it. Um, when we're talking about establishing boundaries, what does that really mean? Because especially as we're going into the holidays, and a lot of people don't always have the best communication or
Yeah.
relationships with their families that they're maybe spending with it. What does it mean to establish a healthy boundary?
Thank you. That's a good question. And I'm going to give you an answer that you might not hear from a lot of counselors that might surprise you. But my fear sometimes is that we use boundaries as an excuse not to connect with people. So I'm not saying boundaries are bad. They can be good, but sometimes we use that term as a way to avoid the scary business of connection, right? So if we define boundaries as anytime I feel fear that I put up a wall, then you'll
Mhm.
never have a connection with anybody, because you can't have meaningful relationships without an element of risk. So there's the vulnerability as the counterpart to boundaries, right? We have to be willing to be vulnerable to a degree that allows us to live in this world and take the kind of risk that says, I need to connect. It's important to me to
Mhm.
connect. Get anything done, to be happy, I need to connect. So we balance that with then the appropriate level of saying, but there's a limit to that, right? I can't just keep putting myself out there and doing
Right.
things that when all I'm getting is like harm. Like,
Mhm.
so there has to be a way of saying, and there's no clear cut answer. Like, what is it? When do you do a boundary, right? We
Right.
just have to, that self-awareness becomes important. When do I feel like the risk reward just doesn't paying off? I'm putting myself out there and all I'm getting back is harm. And so, and sometimes it needs to be more preventative than that. So some examples of good boundaries are just knowing yourself and knowing when is even a good time. So for example, around this time of year, one effective thing with boundaries is how often am I gathering with people? Am I going to every function that's there? So it's finding balance between all the things in your life, both the people you want to care for and also your own self-care.
Mhm.
And, and it's no more complicated than that. It's not easy to do, but it's really just about taking a hard look at things and saying, is this going to, at the end of the day, going to really help me connect and have better situations and help me feel like I'm doing well myself, or is this going to pull me away from myself and other people? And then if it's that, then we say that boundary's okay. Saying no, saying not right now, saying to yourself, and I'll put it this way too. there's some people you're just never going to convince to be selfish, to take care of themselves. So I
Sure.
don't put it that way. You don't say you need to take care of you, because they're just like, that's a violation of who I am. So I
Right.
just reframe it, right? You know the term reframe. It just means we look at it a little differently. And that is to say, in order for me to do what's important to me, which is to be there for other people and help them, I need to make sure that the machine, me, is well oiled and okay. So I'm not going to do this in a selfish way, but I'm going to take care of my needs so that I can be better for other people. See, that's not a violation of, it still allows me to think of myself as somebody who puts other
Right.
people first and cares about them, but it recognizes that in order to do that, you have to sometimes take care of yourself in order to do that. If you're wearing yourself out, you're good to no one, right?
I love that. And it sounds like that really relates to what you were talking about earlier, and that in just knowing yourself and understanding your core values. And the example that you just gave of my core values being able to be there for other people. Well, you can't draw water from an empty well. I have to, in order to be there for other people, which is a core value of mine, I do have to take care of myself. So I love, it sounds like a key component is just knowing who you are, and
Yeah,
maybe even experimenting with that a little bit so you understand what your limits are, so you can create those boundaries in a way that's going to be helpful for you and the people that you're trying to communicate with.
that's a great way to put it. I like your analogy of the well, because the well is something that has two parts. There's the draw from and the put in, right? You're talking
Right.
about drawing water from, what are the things we do to put water in the well? What's the kind of stuff that puts it in there? And then what are the ways that it's removed in a healthy way? Like sometimes giving you my bucket feels good. It feels good to spend my well on people. It's how I connect. But sometimes there are leaks, right? And the leaks are just not effective. No one's getting the water. It's just getting wasted. It's just wasted.
Right.
That's things like undue anxiety, worrying about something that's not even here yet. I'll never say it as well as someone else said, but they said something about fear. Anxiety is just really about punishing ourselves for future failures that haven't even happened yet, right? And it's
I
just
feel very
already,
called out by this.
right? It's just, I'm going to go ahead and do it
Really
now.
personal, Darren.
I know I'm going to fail. I might as well start punishing myself now, right? And so those are the leaks that we want to get rid of. The kind of things that cause that doesn't go to anything. That's wasted water. That's not used for anything positive. So how we talk to ourselves, how we manage preventing the leaks. That's where we get into like what's amiss in our life that's causing us that. What kind of anxiety and fears and challenges are we facing that are the leaks, and addressing those so that we don't have to keep dumping at such a rate, that you can't even keep it full because of the leaks. And then you don't have anything to give because it's just leaking out the bottom. So
I love that. So in the spirit of that, because as we've talked about communication and boundaries, we've talked about increasing your own ability to communicate and stocking your toolbox full of these communication tools. From your own experience, what are some of the easiest tools for people to use, or some of the tools that you recommend most frequently that anyone listening to this uh, can start taking on themselves, can start learning and implementing right away?
good question. I would start by saying tools can become weapons if they're not used out of authentic sincerity, right? They become manipulative. So just pulling a tool out is kind of something you don't authentically connect to. A good example of that is a very common thing we probably all heard, which is the I statements, right?
Mhm.
If you don't understand the spirit of the I statement, you might be saying I statements, but clearly conveying something very different. Like I said I statement, I was taking responsibility. Yeah, but the tone, everything else certainly sounded a
Right.
lot like you're still making this about me. So some of those tools, so first you check in with the carpenter before you work with the tools, right?
Okay.
What kind of place is the carpenter in? Like, what kind of state of mind am I in? Am I in a real authentic place and here's the litmus test, okay? I'm gonna give away what I think the litmus test is for all relationships, whether it's
Yeah.
a customer or your spouse and anything in between, is that I'm asking myself, am I looking out for you? Am I looking out for this person? That's my test. Because as soon as I cannot answer yes, then I know I'm in a place of preservation, and I'm not in a place of connecting and trying to resolve. I'm just trying to look out for myself. So I'm
Interesting.
always asking myself, and if the answer is no, that's when we get into what can I do to correct that, or do I need to take a timeout, right? What are
Mhm.
some quick ways to correct that, and or what kind of timeout do I need to take? The skill that we all know, if I were to run a poll on here and we ask people, what's the most important communication skill? What do you think people would say?
I'd say listening.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like, oh no, pop quiz.
Like, I didn't know I was going to be tested, but yeah, I think you're right. I think they would say listening, and it's probably the skill that's the least maybe appreciated, and we don't know it, but it's probably the skill we're the worst at when we look at it, right? And
Right.
so that's the skill: listening and active listening, listening to understand, asking questions to clarify. If anybody wants something more concrete than that, that brings together the listening and the talking, I'll refer back to what I said earlier with the speaker listener technique. Okay, this can be a coordinated tool to help people make sure that they're having a better conversation. Today, and I drove into work, took a lot more time. There was snow, was intense. It was beautiful
Mhm.
outside, but it was very, very slippery. I saw probably 10 cars slid off the side of the road or run into each other.
Oh
Well,
my
what did
goodness.
they tell you? Yeah, it was crazy. But what do they tell you to do whenever the weather's bad, when you're driving? What's the first thing that police always say to do? Slow
Go slow.
down, right? Go slow, go slow. And that's true of communication. Let's slow it down because the speed is where we get into trouble. So how do we slow it down? Well, one way to do that is to follow the speaker listener technique. And that is to, when it's my turn as a speaker, I share my thought and I have rules I live by. One is to not mind read and tell you what you're thinking. That's where the I
Mhm.
statement. I tell you about what my thoughts are, my perceptions, and I share it in a non-threatening way to not overwhelm you with my stuff. Share it in a way that I own and keep it brief and pause and give you opportunities to do your job as the listener, which is this is where it gets a little bit canned and weird and people abandon it because it feels too cheesy. And that is to then reframe what you hear to say, so you're telling me that when you drove in this morning, you were feeling kind of a little bit anxious about that. And you saw some wrecks and it made you kind of concerned. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But you'd be surprised how often you think you're going to reframe it and you know exactly what they just said. And you'll hear them say, no, that's not, you're missing the point. That is not what I'm trying to say. And then we can correct. How many of our just communication problems start with just a misunderstanding in the very beginning? We just
Right.
didn't, yeah, that just got off to a bad start, and it becomes like a comedy of errors, like it's this whole misunderstanding that we just build upon. So I would say really that skill of listening and then not moving on until you've heard it correctly. And then you can share the floor where you give the other person a chance to be the speaker and they share. And then when you get really good at it, you take a step deeper, and that is to show empathy, right? Not just listen and understand. Yeah, you were concerned. You told me you were concerned about driving in this morning. It made you feel a little bit nervous. But when you get into empathy, it's like, yeah, that feeling, that's kind of scary, isn't it? Like you're really starting to get into the emotional aspect. And
Right.
I've felt, I'm not sure I know what you felt, but I've felt those things before. I've been in that position, and sometimes you get that, oh, am I going to be all right moment? Is that how you felt? And you really try to understand someone's feelings, and now you're really getting somewhere because you're connecting around their emotions and not just the words that are being used.
Absolutely. I love two things that really stood out to me from what you just described of when you're in the situation where you're reflecting back what the other person has shared with you and they say, no, that's not what I meant at all. It's not when you're reflecting and you have a tone of non-judgment, it's not an angry, no, you don't
Right,
understand. It's a,
right.
oh no, I see how you interpreted it that way. This is what I actually meant. And it's a
Yeah,
clarifying thing where it really is building the communication rather than butting heads over a miscommunication. And I also loved how you described empathy being so often we fall into sympathy of from your example of just being, oh, I'm so sorry you had to drive into work like that. I get to work from home, so you're like, that was too bad for you. I'm really sorry you had to do that. But really connecting with your experience of, oh my goodness, like that does sound really frightening. It sounds like that maybe really impacted how you started your day. How did it start your, how did that affect you? And
Mm-hmm.
being able to use those tools to really communicate. So thank you so much. Is there any, if you were to leave our listeners with any one final takeaway, what would that be?
Well, that's a good question. That's the golden question. I would say I would refer back to the Serenity Prayer, which if people in addiction treatment use this because it's powerful. It helps people gain control over their behavior. And that is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That wisdom is I think, is a key here, that the people who succeed the best in their communication, number one, they're most self-aware. They're in tune with their own stuff. So they self-soothe, they self-confront, and so they bring their better self into a conversation. And then they build upon that by trying to help the other person succeed, and not put up tests and walls and hope that people can get through them, obstacles, and see if you can navigate that. But to point you just said a second ago, if I'm got kind of this attitude of boy, no, you got it wrong, try again, I'm not really helping them succeed. Say, that's pretty, you got some of that. Let me help you understand where I'm really coming from. And so we're in a spirit of trying to help people succeed. And if we have that attitude, an attitude of forgiveness and patience, then we can overcome any kind of challenges. I really believe that in any kind of relationship. And some of the best, most rewarding ones are the ones that really were the hardest. And that's the good news, is that the most important ones and some of the hardest ones can become some of the most rewarding if we'll invest ourselves in that process.
I love that. And making yourself vulnerable enough and have the courage enough to take that step into the higher risk, higher stakes conversations and communications.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Darren Elkins. Thank you for being here from Blomquist Hale Solutions. I really appreciate your insights. I think everybody learned so much from this, and just great messaging to take into the end of the year and to start our new year, hopefully, with building relationships and building our communication skills. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Wellness Wednesday, and drive safe. If you are in a snowy place like we are, make sure you're driving carefully. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny.